Imagine this. An ordinary day, a squeak of brakes on the side of the road, and a young boy, without hesitation, decides to help an elderly man with his broken car. But what happened the next day is what changed everything. This story begins with a simple act of kindness, but ends with an incredible discovery. What would you do if you found out that the person you helped owned a huge luxury car dealership? Before we continue, tell us about yourself. Write in the comments what your name is and where you're watching this video from. It's insanely important for us to get to know you better. Each of your likes and comments helps us promote the channel and share such inspiring stories. You are our source of inspiration, and it's because of you that we grow and continue to delight you. Thank you for being with us. Now hold on tight because the story is just beginning. The warm sun was shining brightly, illuminating the narrow country road lined with rows of old oak trees. Little Tim, a 12-year-old boy with a mischievous look and an eternal interest in everything that was going on around him, was returning home after a walk. His backpack bounced slightly with every step, and in his hand he held his favorite adventure book, which he had read dozens of times. A strange sound caught his attention, a loud click and a low hiss. Tim stopped, listening. Behind the trees, just off the road, he saw an old car parked in a ditch. An elderly man was fidgeting with the car. His gray hair was disheveled, and his face looked worried. The man leaned over and opened the hood, a light smoke billowing from it. Curiosity got the better of him. Tim stepped closer, careful not to frighten the stranger away. "Are you all right?" he asked boldly, stopping at a safe distance. The man straightened and turned to the boy. The man straightened up and turned to the boy, but a smile softened his expression. "Oh, hello, son," he said with a grateful smile. "It seems my old friend has decided to finally give up. The car's broken down, and I don't even know where to start." Tim took a step closer, taking a closer look at the car. It looked like it had been around for decades. Dusty paintwork, scratches on the doors, but it was respectable. The car clearly had a history. "Maybe there's something I can do to help?" Tim suggested. The man raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You? Help?" He laughed, but immediately looked at Tim with kindness. "You know, why not, though? I obviously can't do this alone." Tim walked over to the car, setting his book down on a nearby tree stump. Despite his young age, he loved to tinker with machinery, helping his father with repairs to their bicycle and old motorcycle. He began examining the engine, asking the older man questions. When did the car break down? Were there any strange noises before that? The man looked at the boy with surprise and admiration. Who would have thought that a strange child would show so much enthusiasm and willingness to help? Despite the complexity of the situation, the conversation flowed easily. Tim talked about his hobbies, and the man shared stories from his youth. Gradually, the man's anxiety was replaced by a warm feeling of trust. "You know, boy, you're a real friend. It's rare to find such kindness these days," he said, putting a hand on Tim's shoulder. The boy only smiled. He wasn't thinking about getting anything in return. It felt good to just be useful. After an hour, Tim and the man together were able to make temporary repairs so that the car would at least make it to the nearest service. The man shook the boy's hand firmly before driving away. "Thank you, young man. You're my hero today," he said with a smile, disappearing over the horizon. Tim stood by the roadside, watching the car drive away, and had no way of knowing that this chance encounter would change his life forever. Tim stood hesitantly at the edge of the road, watching the man who was once again bent over the engine of his old car. His oil-covered hands wandered helplessly among the gears, and his expression grew more and more confused. The boy was only 12 years old, but he felt two voices fighting inside him. One persuaded him to pass on. "You don't know anything about cars, so why go where you can't do anything?" The other voice said the opposite. "This man needs help. Even if you don't know anything, shouldn't you at least try?" Weighing everything, Tim took a deep breath and walked determinedly toward the car. His heart was pounding faster and faster as he got closer. "Hello?" he called loudly so as not to frighten the man. Toth turned around sharply, nearly hitting his head on the raised hood. "Oh, you scared me," the man said with relief, dusting his hands off with a rag. "What can I do for you, son?" Tim felt a slight embarrassment, but decided to hold his confidence. "I'm the one who'd like to help you, sir." "Your car broke down?" The man raised his eyebrows in surprise, looking at the boy with interest. "You? Need a hand?" He grinned. "That's brave of you. Isn't that too much for someone so young?" Tim blushed but didn't back down. "Maybe, but sometimes even a little help can make a difference. I'm not a mechanic, though, but I have some experience with tools." Those words made the man think. He looked at the boy, scrutinizing his confidence and sincere desire to help. "You know, you surprise me," he finally said, smiling. "All right, let's give it a try. If we can't make it, at least we can pass the time." The man gave Tim a simple task, to check if the terminals on the battery were loose. The boy deftly unscrewed the cap and carefully examined the connections. Then, following the man's instructions, he began to check other parts. "Is that a radiator hose?" Tim asked, pointing to a small tube that was oozing liquid. The man gave a surprised look. "That's right. How could I not have noticed?" he exclaimed, his voice filled with joy. Although they were only able to fix part of the problem, the man was impressed with the boy's perseverance and effort. "You're a very smart boy," he said, patting Tim on the shoulder. "You know, not every adult would have stopped to help, and you did it without thinking." Tim shrugged. "I just thought if I didn't try it, you might stay here for a long time. Besides, it's nice to help." The man pondered the boy's words, and then, taking him by the hand, said, "The world needs more people like you, kid." Tim didn't expect praise, but those words made him feel that he had done something really important. They continued to work together, and although the car's problems were not completely solved, the man was able to start it and get to the service. As the car drove away, Tim realized that his bold decision had not only helped the stranger, but also made him feel proud of his actions. At that moment, he didn't know how fateful his action would be. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange light on the road. Tim stood on the side of the road watching the old car drive slowly away. The engine was still making strange noises, but the car was moving, thanks to their combined efforts. A light breeze played in his hair, but the boy was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't notice it. He didn't expect anything in return. To Tim, helping an elderly man was as natural as giving a hand to a friend who had stumbled on the road. All he wanted was for the stranger to get home safely. Meanwhile, the man himself, sitting behind the wheel of his car, was thinking the same thing. He was surprised that the boy, a stranger, had shown such sincere concern. There was no question of money or gratitude. Tim just wanted to help. That's rare these days, the man thought, glimpsing in the rearview mirror where the boy's silhouette was disappearing. When Tim returned home, he felt a pleasant satisfaction that his day had not been in vain. He told his mother what had happened, and she smiled and praised him. You did the right thing, son. Good things always come back, even if not right away." Tim, however, did not think about it. He didn't see his act as something great. For him, it was just a moment, part of his character, a desire to make the world a little better. The next day, Tim woke up early. Saturday morning was fresh and quiet, and he was going to spend it playing his favorite games with his friends. But as soon as he stepped outside, he saw a black car at the gate of their house, a car that looked nothing like the one that had been smoking on the curb yesterday. The same old man got out of the car, only now he looked completely different. Instead of a shabby shirt and dirty hands, he wore a smart suit and a bright smile. "Good morning, Tim," he called out. The boy froze with surprise. "Oh, hello. Are you having car trouble again?" he asked, coming closer. The man laughed. No, my young friend. I'm doing just fine today, and it's all thanks to you." The boy was confused. "But, I was just being a little helpful." The man nodded, becoming more serious. "That's right, you helped." Simple, sincerely, without expecting anything in return. That's something that's rare today, especially among adults. And it's something that's really stuck with me. Tim was silent, looking at his sneakers in embarrassment. "Do you know who I am, Tim?" the man suddenly asked. The boy shrugged. "No, sir. All I know is that you had a broken-down car." The man smiled and handed the boy a business card. "And I own a car dealership, one of the largest in our city." Tim's eyes widened. "Really?" he exclaimed, almost dropping the business card. "Absolutely. And you know what? I want to show you something," the man added with a sly smile. But instead of explaining right away, he invited Tim and his family to his car dealership. At that moment, Tim did not know that his simple act of kindness would be the beginning of an incredible chain of events. The man wanted to show the boy that even the smallest act of kindness can change not only the fate of the one helped, but also the one who helped. As Tim and the man worked together to fix the car, they had a leisurely conversation. The older man, whose name turned out to be Harold, kept casting admiring glances at the boy. He was surprised not only by Tim's determination, but also by his patience and attention to detail. "You know, Tim, this is the first time I've met a young guy like that who not only wants to help, but does it with such dedication," Harold said, pulling an oily rag from under the hood. Tim, who was concentrating on trying to tighten the nut, shrugged his shoulders in embarrassment. "It just seemed to me that you needed help," he replied. "Isn't that normal?" Harold smiled, squatted down next to the boy, and looked him in the eye. "Unfortunately, son, not always. Many people today are afraid to stop, afraid to offer their help. They think, what if it's not my problem? Or what will I get in return?" Tim pondered those words, setting aside the wrench. "But it's wrong," he said, frowning. "If you can help, why don't you just do it?" Harold took a deep breath. "You're right, but life isn't that simple. You know, years ago, I was just like you, young, brave, willing to help anyone." The man was silent for a moment, as if remembering a distant past. "When I was in my early 20s, he continued, I was driving home late at night. On the road, I saw a woman with 2 children. She had a flat tire and they were stuck in the middle of an empty highway. I pulled over to help. I didn't have the experience like you do, but I was still able to change her tire." Tim listened, holding his breath. "She thanked me, of course, but I didn't think it was that important. A few months later, I found out that the woman was a widow, barely making ends meet. She found me to thank me again and told me that she was taking her children to the hospital that night. If I hadn't helped, they wouldn't have made it in time." Harold was silent, his voice softer. It was the moment I realized sometimes even the smallest good deed can save someone's life. Tim thought for a moment. "But how did you know that your actions made such a difference? You might never have known." Harold smiled and patted the boy on the shoulder. "That's the point, Tim. We don't help to see what happens. We help because it's the right thing to do." Those words stuck in Tim's mind. He felt that their conversation meant more than just an exchange of stories. It was a lesson that would stay with him forever. As they finished with the car and Harold prepared to leave, he looked at Tim warmly. "You're a real example to others, boy. Keep it up. The world needs people who believe in good." Tim stood watching the car slowly drive away, feeling that their meeting was no coincidence. It was a sign that even the smallest actions could be filled with great meaning. Harold's old car rumbled at last, making a final effort to move. Smoke was no longer billowing from under the hood, and the engine sounded much smoother and more confident. Tim stood beside him, proud that he had helped the old car come to life, albeit temporarily. Harold turned to the boy, shaking off his hands, and smiled warmly. "Well, master, I think we've done it," he said, shaking his head toward the engine. "Without you, I'd be stuck here for a long time." Tim smiled shyly, hiding his hands behind his back. "Glad I could help, sir," he replied, lowering his gaze to the ground. Harold looked at the boy carefully, as if he wanted to memorize every detail of the moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. "Listen, Tim," he began, opening his notebook and tearing out a sheet of paper. "If you ever need help, any help at all, there's my number. You can always count on me." Tim took the sheet with surprise and carefully tucked it into the pocket of his jeans. "Thank you, sir," he said, a little embarrassed, "but I just did what I thought was right." Harold laughed, patting the boy's shoulder good-naturedly. "That's what's so amazing, my boy. People rarely do things for nothing these days. Don't forget, Tim, your kindness is your strength. Cherish it." Those words sounded like something important to Tim, but he couldn't quite grasp their meaning yet. He just nodded, watching as the man got behind the wheel and slowly pulled back onto the road. "See you later, Tim." Harold said goodbye, waving goodbye. "Goodbye," shouted the boy, waving back at him. The car disappeared around the corner, leaving behind only the faint smell of gasoline. Tim was alone on the side of the road. The wind rustled the leaves quietly, and the evening sun cast a soft golden light on everything. The boy felt a strange warmth inside, as if he had done something very important, something that meant much more than fixing the car. He turned around and walked slowly home, his backpack swaying on his back, and Harold's words kept running through his mind. Tim had no idea that this seemingly random encounter was the beginning of something bigger. An act of kindness, done without thought or expectation, would soon change his life in the most unexpected ways. But for now, he was just walking down the road, enjoying the feeling that he had made the world a little better. Somewhere in the distance, Harold's car rumbled again. The old engine came to life again, as if thanking the boy for his help. The next morning, sunlight peeked through Tim's window, gently waking him from his sweet slumber. He stretched, got out of bed, and, thinking about yesterday's incident, quickly cleaned himself up. There were already sounds in the house. His mom was making breakfast, and his little sister was playing in the living room. Tim walked down the stairs, still a little lost in his memories. When he sat down at the table, his mother, smiling, placed a plate of pancakes in front of him. Did you do anything special yesterday? She asked with a sly smile. Tim wondered. Well, I was just helping a man on the road. His car broke down, he said, shrugging his shoulders. Mom took a seat across from me, her eyes glittering with curiosity. Do you know who this man is? Tim frowned, trying to figure out how Mom could have known about this. His name is Harold, he began. He's just a man who needed help. Mom laughed. Well, just a man turned out to be the owner of one of the largest car dealerships in our city, she announced. Tim dropped his fork. What? He exclaimed. Yes, Mom confirmed, smiling. Your father heard about it from a neighbor this morning. Turns out Mr. Harold owns a chain of high-end car dealerships, and, you know what? He was so impressed with your kindness, he mentioned you when he told the local paper about it. Tim couldn't believe his ears. A newspaper? He interjected. Mom picked up the small sheet she had brought with her and showed Tim the note. In the article, Harold talked about an incredibly kind boy who had stopped without a shadow of a doubt to help him without even knowing who he was. Are you sure it's about me? Tim asked, still trying to comprehend what he had heard. Mom nodded. Of course it's about you. Tim, you did something very important yesterday. This man appreciated your good heart, and it seems he's not going to let it go unnoticed. The boy felt a rush of emotion. He was pleased that his deed had become meaningful to another person, but he still didn't understand why Harold had chosen to speak about it publicly. With these thoughts, Tim went outside. His friends were already waiting for him, and they immediately ran up to him. Tim, we read about you in the paper. You're a local hero now, shouted one of them. Another friend, waving a smartphone, added, And you know what? They say this Harold guy wants to give you something. You're a superstar, Tim. Confusion mixed with excitement. The boy felt a little embarrassed by the attention. For him, it was all just the result of a sincere desire to help, not an attempt to become famous. When Tim returned home, he didn't know that the day would bring him more surprises. Soon, the same car that Harold had fixed the day before pulled up in front of the house, but it was driven by a different man. Is that him? Tim asked, running out to the wicket. The uniformed man smiled and nodded. Mr. Harold wanted me to tell you that he's expecting you and your family at his car dealership tomorrow. He has something special for you, Tim. The boy, breathless, took the invitation and felt something more than he could have expected begin in his life. The day after the amazing news, Tim woke up before everyone else. His heart was pounding so hard, as if he expected to meet some fairy tale hero. Since the evening, he had told his mom and dad about the invitation from Mr. Harold, and his parents were equally intrigued. His mother had a long discussion with his father about what to wear, and Tim, in spite of his excitement, refused even to guess what awaited him. By noon, a familiar car stopped in front of their house again, but this time it was driven by a driver in an elegant uniform. The man got out politely, opened the back door, and bowed slightly. Good afternoon, he said, addressing Tim's family. Mr. Harold sent me to bring you to him. Tim froze with surprise, and Mom, a little confused, smiled. Did he send a car for us? She whispered. This seems to be getting more serious than we thought, Dad added with a slight smile. The boy excitedly got into the car, and his parents settled down next to him. It was their first trip in such a luxurious car. Soft leather seats, cool air conditioning, and pleasant music made it feel like they were going to more than just a car dealership. When the car pulled up to the building, Tim froze. A huge, gleaming glass car dealership loomed before him. A sign on the roof read, Harold Auto. Rows of perfectly lined up luxury cars glistened in the sunlight. Each car looked like a work of art, and the boy couldn't take his eyes off it. Mr. Harold himself met them on the doorstep. He wore a dark blue suit, but his smile was as warm as the day they met. "Tim," he exclaimed, coming closer, "it's so good to see you again." The boy smiled embarrassedly as he shook the outstretched hand. "Hello, Mr. Harold. We're here as you requested." The man glanced warmly at Tim, then turned to his parents. "Thank you for taking the time to come. I wanted to personally thank your son for what he did. His kindness touched me to the core." Mom and Dad looked proudly at Tim, who now looked a little embarrassed. "Now, let me show you something," Harold said, pointing to the huge showroom. When they stepped inside, Tim felt like he was in another world. The huge hall was filled with the latest models of cars, shiny sedans, powerful SUVs, and sleek sports cars, each one looking like it had stepped out of a movie about the future. "Amazing, isn't it?" Harold said, noticing the boy looking at the cars with his mouth open. Tim nodded, unable to get a word out. "I decided that such an honest and kind boy couldn't be ignored," Harold continued, pulling up next to a white sports car. "Good things always come back. And today I want to do something for you, Tim." The boy looked at the man in surprise. "For me? But why?" he asked, still not understanding what was happening. Harold leaned slightly to be on the same level as Tim. "Because you didn't expect anything in return when you decided to help. You did it out of the goodness of your heart, and that's the kind of thing that should be celebrated." He turned around and pointed to a small, bright red card. "I thought I'd give you this little car. It's not quite grown up, but it's perfect for someone like you. I think you'll appreciate it." Tim couldn't believe his eyes. In front of him stood a miniature sports car, a go-kart that looked as if it had been made especially for him. Is it for me?" he whispered. Harold nodded. "Yes, Tim, but that's not all. I want you to understand that what you did inspired me. You reminded me how important it is to help others, and that's why I'm going to start a foundation to help kids who want to learn and help the world. I'm going to name it after you." The boy stood stunned, and his parents were on the verge of tears. "Thank you, sir," Tim finally said, feeling his heart overflow with happiness. Harold put a hand on his shoulder. "No, Tim, thank you. You reminded me that the world can be a better place if each of us does something good." Tim and his family spent the day at the car dealership enjoying Harold's hospitality. And although the boy was incredibly happy with his gift, he realized the most important thing: even a small act of kindness can set off a chain of incredible events. When Tim and his family left the dealership after the first tour, they were in for another surprise. Harold, standing at the entrance, smiled broadly and waved to the driver. Just then, a shiny black limousine pulled up to them, gleaming as if it had just rolled off the assembly line. "Today, I want to show you what the world can look like if you add a little sparkle to it," Harold said. "It's not just to impress you, Tim, but to make you realize that your kindness can lead you to amazing opportunities." The boy got into the car with a sinking heart, followed by his parents. The interior of the limousine was like a fairy tale. Soft leather seats, a backlit screen, a small refrigerator with drinks. Tim couldn't imagine ever being in a place like this. "Where are we going?" he finally asked, barely able to contain his excitement. "It's a secret." Harold smiled slyly. "But I promise it will be something unforgettable." The limousine sped through the city streets, gliding smoothly past the windows of expensive boutiques and tall buildings. Tim stared out the window in amazement, noticing things he hadn't noticed before. Restaurants with gilded signs, boutiques with mannequins and incredibly expensive clothes, huge advertising screens with luxury cars. It all seems so different, he said, not looking away from the window. Because it's your first time here, Harold said. But remember, Tim, luxury is not a goal, it's just an opportunity. The key is to stay true to yourself. The limousine stopped in front of a grand building made entirely of glass and steel. It had a sign on the top that said Sky Lounge. Tim didn't realize what the place was until they were escorted inside. They took the elevator, which moved at breakneck speed, and found themselves in a luxurious room with panoramic windows. "This is a restaurant at the top of the city," Harold explained. "You will be my guests tonight." Tim, his parents, and Harold sat down at a table set with fine china and shiny utensils. Waiters brought dishes that looked as if they had been prepared by artists, miniature masterpieces garnished with fresh herbs and sauces. "Everything here is so beautiful," Tim said, tasting the piece of dessert that was melting in his mouth. "That's what I wanted to show you, Tim," Harold said. "Beauty comes in many forms. It can be in a car, in a building, or in food. But the most important beauty is what you do. Good deeds like yours make the world a better place." After the restaurant, Harold took them to his main office, a premium car showroom. Here, the cars looked as if they could accelerate to the speed of light. Each model was a work of art. Sleek lines, perfect polish, innovative technology. "Tim, do you know why I decided to show you all this?" Harold asked as they pulled up in front of a red sports car. "No, sir," the boy answered honestly. "Because I want you to realize that a world of opportunity is always open to those who remain honest and kind. When you helped me, you didn't know who I was. You just did the right thing, and that's what brought you here." Harold walked over to the boy and lightly ruffled his hair. "Remember, it is not how much wealth you have, but how you use it that matters. You can always achieve a lot if you remain yourself." Just when Tim thought the day couldn't get any better, Harold led them into the hall where a shiny, miniature electric car stood. It was the go-kart the boy had seen on the first day. Harold handed the keys to Tim. "This gift is a symbol of your future," he said. "I see potential in you, Tim. Maybe one day you'll be running cars, maybe entire companies. But remember, it all starts with kindness." Tim looked at the cards and then at Harold. He felt that he had received not only a gift, but also an important lesson. When they got home, Tim was quiet. His parents looked at him with a smile, realizing that the boy was overwhelmed with emotion. He had spent the day in a world of luxury, but it didn't make him feel superior to others. On the contrary, he realized that kindness was valued above everything else. That night, looking up at the stars, Tim promised himself he would always be as Harold saw him, kind, sincere, and willing to help. After an unforgettable day spent in the world of luxury, Harold decided it was time to reveal another surprise he had long kept secret. After saying goodbye to the car dealership staff, he invited Tim and his family back into the limousine. "I know I've already done quite a bit," he began, turning to the boy, "but there's one more thing I'd like to do for you and your parents." Tim looked at Harold in surprise. His parents looked at each other, not knowing what to say. "Mr. Harold, you've already done so much," Tim's mother said gently. "You've given Tim cards, taken us on a tour, shown us so many amazing places. We're immensely grateful, but it's too much." Harold smiled, raising his hand to reassure her. "Mrs. Watson, Believe me, it's not too much for me. Tim reminded me that kindness has great value. When I was a child, I too was in a difficult situation, and one man helped me without asking for anything in return. It was because of his help that I was able to build what you see today. I want to continue this cycle of kindness. The car turned into a quiet alley with tall oaks surrounding the road. Tim leaned against the window, trying to see where they were going. Finally, the limo stopped in front of a cozy two-story house with a white picket fence, a well-kept garden, and a small front lawn. It was a place that smelled warm and homey. "Welcome to the new phase of your life," Harold announced, getting out of the car and gesturing for them to follow him. "What is this place?" Tim's father asked, trying to contain his surprise. "This is your new home," Harold replied calmly. The words hung in the air. Tim's mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. His father froze in place, and Tim stared at Harold and the house, unable to believe his ears. "Our house?" Tim asked, his voice shaking with excitement. "That's right," Harold confirmed. "I know you live in a small house on the outskirts of town, and it's probably too small for your family. This house is larger, cozier, and in a great neighborhood. I want you to feel at home here. All this is to thank you for your kindness and for raising such a wonderful son." "But that's too generous, Mr. Harold," Tim's father said at last. "We can't accept such a gift." Harold raised his hand, stopping him. "I realize this may seem like too much, but believe me, it's not just a gift to me. It is my way of showing that goodness returns in the most unexpected forms. I'm sure you will take this as an opportunity to continue to do good." He went to the door, pulled out his keys, and handed them to Tim. "Do you want to be the first one to open the door?" he asked with a smile. Tim took the keys, his hands trembling. He walked slowly to the door, slid the key into the keyhole, and turned it. The door opened softly, and they were faced with a bright, spacious hallway. Inside, the house looked even better. Large windows let in plenty of light, cozy furniture was already in place, and there was a fireplace in the corner of the living room as if calling them to gather around it on a winter evening. This is incredible," Tim's mom exhaled, her eyes on the verge of tears. "I've thought of everything," Harold continued, showing them the house. "There are 3 bedrooms, so that each of you has your own space. The kitchen has everything you need, and there's room in the garden to play, Tim. You can race your go-kart around the path." Tim still couldn't believe what was happening. He walked to his new room where a poster of a race car hung on the wall and a new laptop stood on the desk. "Is it mine?" he whispered. Harold nodded. "It's all yours. You deserve it, Tim. You reminded me that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change fate. This house is a symbol of your good heart." The boy could not contain his emotions. He ran up to Harold and hugged him. "Thank you, Mr. Harold. Thank you for everything. I'll never forget it." Harold stroked his head. "And I won't forget you, Tim. You inspired me just as you once inspired me. Live happily here and remember, good things come back." This evening, Tim's family had their first dinner in their new home. Fireflies played outside the window, and inside there was laughter and conversation. Harold was gone, but he left behind not only a home, but a deep sense that the world is a better place when we do things for each other sincerely and unselfishly. It had been a few weeks since Tim's family had moved into their new home. Life in the new place was a real treat for them. Spacious rooms, a cozy living room where the whole family gathered in the evenings, and a garden where Tim spent time racing his go-kart, which was a symbol of a dream come true for him. But the most important thing happened not on the outside, but on the inside. Tim often sat at the window of his room, looking out at the sunset, and thought about how one small decision to stop and help an elderly man had changed everything. He wasn't sure he had done anything remarkable, but now he realized that was the whole point. Tim thought back to the day he had seen Harold on the side of the road. It had seemed simple then. Someone needed help, and he had offered it. But now he saw to act differently. Harold didn't just get help with his car, he got a reminder that the world was still kind, and in return, he gave Tim and his family more than they could have dreamed of. Tim suddenly realized that goodness works like a chain reaction. One act can inspire another person to do their own good deeds, and it goes on until it changes the whole world. He decided that he would never let himself forget that lesson. One evening, sitting in the garden, Tim spoke to his parents. "Do you think I did the right thing?" he asked, looking up at the stars. Mom looked at him in surprise. "Of course, Tim. You've done more than just the right thing. You showed us all that kindness always comes back. We're proud of you." The father, who seldom expressed his feelings in words, added, "You know, son, you did something a lot of adults hesitate to do. Sometimes people are too busy to stop and help. You reminded us that it's important to be human no matter what." These words went deep into Tim's heart. He realized that what he had done was not only a part of his life, but also a lesson to his parents and probably to many others. A few days later, Tim found in his new room the sheet Harold had given him the day they met. It had a phone number written on it and a little message, "If you ever need help, call me." Tim smiled, remembering how much his life had changed since then. But instead of using that number, he decided to do something else. He started keeping a small journal where he wrote down all his thoughts about helping others. His first entry were the words, "Every day gives you a chance to do something good. Don't miss it." Tim started with little things. He helped neighbors with their garden, looked after his little sister, and once even stopped to fix the bike of a boy who was riding down the street and had a small accident. And each time he did something good, he felt the chain of goodness continue. Tim's family was also inspired by his example. Mom started participating more in charity events, helping local families. Dad started taking more weekends off to spend time with his family, realizing that this is what matters most. But the real surprise was how Tim's kindness began to spread beyond their family. One day, their neighbor, Mrs. Harper, heard about Tim's act and organized a small fundraiser for underprivileged children. The poster for the event read, "Goodness Returns, inspired by Tim Watson." All this made Tim think about the main lesson he had learned from his story. He realized that kindness is not just an act, but a state of mind. It is the ability to notice the needs of others and to be ready to help without expecting a reward. The world can be a complicated and cruel place, Tim thought as he looked out at the sunset. But if each of us does just a little bit of good, we can make it a better place. Now, Tim knew that his life had not changed because of Harold's gifts or a new house. It had changed because he had realized that the smallest things can change lives, not only for those who are helped, but also for those who are helped. Tim's story was a lesson to many in their town. It reminded people that the world needs simple and sincere acts that make it brighter. But for Tim himself, this story was the beginning of his journey. A journey where he wanted to do good, inspire others, and never forget that one simple act helped him open the door to a world full of possibilities. And somewhere, far away, sitting in his office, Mr. Harold, smiling, remembered that boy who wasn't afraid to stop to help. Friends, what do you think about this story? Write in the comments if it inspired you, and if you have similar cases in your life when a kindness or an unexpected act changed someone's fate. Or maybe you'd like to share moments when you faced injustice or racism and how you dealt with it. We are very interested to hear your point of view. We want to remind you that each and every one of you is incredibly important to us. Your comments, likes, and subscriptions help us continue to share stories like this and inspire others. We appreciate each and every one of you, and thank you for being with us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give us a like. It will help us keep creating interesting content for you. We wish you a wonderful day filled with acts of kindness and inspiration. Remember, the world is a better place when we help each other.